Since kindergarten, I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. And while I spent my time learning in classes, I also spent time doing some recon for when I had my own classroom. And those of you who know me might be surprised to learn that I even kept a little book where I jotted down ideas about bulletin boards that I saw, or really cool lessons. And I was getting prepared, because you gotta be prepared for this job. And I was fortunate. I lucked out and had great teachers, really throughout my career. But it wasn't until grade 5 that I met Mrs. Mitchell, and I knew what kind of teacher I wanted to be. She was unlike any teacher I had met before. We did amazing things like a writer's workshop, and she shared her seemingly endless collection of books with me, and I consumed them, and we'd talk about them later. She shared with us the picture book, The True Story of the Three Little Pigs, and we broke off into the prosecution and the defense. And our classmates came as witnesses, and she sat as the judge, and the parents were the jury, and we defended and brought the big bad wolf to justice. She introduced me to poetry and the messiness of the writing process, and she listened to me and engaged me in conversation when I followed her around on supervision. In fact, she's the kid that I would hate to have. Like, I'm the kid that you're like, seriously, can you not go find someone to play with? I was that kid following her around, and she talked to me, which was impressive. She ordered books that she thought I would be interested in, and we would talk about them and the parts I loved and the things that she thought were interesting. I was lucky enough to have her again in grade 6, and our class did a novel study on a book that I had already read. Shocking, I know. And so she had me do an independent project with a different book. And we explored storytelling, and we made a hot air balloon out of a dry cleaning bag, which oddly enough did not go well because the hair dryer got too close to the bag, and then it kind of fell, and it was like the one science experiment we did that year. And we even hosted a school assembly in the style of a news broadcast. Amazing things happened with her leading our class. The following year, she went to a different school. But, hashtag things that don't happen nowadays, she shared her mailing address with me. And we kept in touch on and off throughout my high school years. We had one English class where we read the short story called The Metaphor. And in case you're not familiar with it, during that story, a teacher happens to get hit by a bus. Sad and tragic, yes, but the assignment that we had to do afterwards was to write, wait for it, a metaphor about someone important in our lives. And so I chose to write about her. And because I can't help myself, I sent it to her, and enclosed with a letter, of course. And she wrote back thanking me, explaining that she had a particularly difficult class that year. And it was nice to hear from me and be reminded about a time when she felt like a great teacher. As I finished up grade 12, she let me volunteer in her classroom. Again, I love seeing how she taught her students and the books that she shared with them. As I went off to university to earn my own teaching degree, I think I took a little of her with me at the back of my mind, and I found myself using books as a tool to build relationships with the students I was meeting in my practicums. Fast forward many years, just a few suppers ago, we were able to get together for a long overdue visit. We talked about effective reading instruction and tools for assessment and great books to read and the amazing profession we were both part of. It was absolutely wonderful. I reach out to her from time to time and let her know what I'm up to and tell her about the powerful impact that she had on me. As a teacher, I don't think I've ever intentionally planned how I would build connections with my students. We plan lessons, we plan units, but we don't plan relationships. And as I thought about the topic of relationships, I couldn't help but wonder about the duration of said relationships. Does it need to span several years, or could it be a connection forged in just a few months? Many of the students that immediately came to mind were ones I have known for years, but then the strangest thing happened just after I'd emailed Liam about signing up for this. I had a student stop by and visit. And while this is not new for me, the unique thing about this was the student had to find me because I no longer worked at the school he knew me from. And more interesting was the fact that I didn't actually teach this student directly because I knew him in my role as the academic support teacher. So I helped him with some math, and we talked about things that he was passionate about, like mountain biking, and the struggles he was having in grade 9, and the hopes that he had for the future. So here I was connecting with a former student that I didn't even realize that I had impacted in some way. And this created an interesting twist in my thought process for this talk, as I was now faced with the possibility that the students that I had the biggest impact on may not even be ones I know about. Therefore, the list of potential students I could talk about has grown, but my time slot did not. Therefore, I have no choice but to talk until the buzzer goes, and then hope they do this again next year so I can tell about some more students that I know. Joyce Heatherly talks about balcony people, the people who cheer you on and energize you with affirmation. And I hope these students hold me in their hearts as one of their balcony people. The reality is that maybe it's not just about students coming back to us and letting us know that we left an impression on them, but also taking a moment to reflect on the students that leave an impression on us. McKinley, I first met as the younger brother of one of my grade 2 students. Several years later, joined my junior high journalism class, not as a junior high student, but as an elementary correspondent. At age 8, he was contributing to our blog with his own posts, writing his own interview questions that he used with a visiting magician, and researching topics of interest. He loved to share his learning and be challenged in the areas of reading and writing. He also happened to love Nintendo. So naturally, I gave him my Super Nintendo circa 1993, and a small gaming collection that I had. He was eager to share how far he got each night, and the frustration that his progress could only be saved at certain points in the game, especially when Mom was telling it was time for bed. There was Bill, a gifted grade 9 student who rose to the challenge I offered him that he was the only person in class that may be able to pull off randomness in his narrative. You know, the fractured storylines of quality programming like Family Guy. He managed to do this all at home after school, as he was much more interested in social interactions during the school day. He also happened to write a graphic novella for his final creative writing assignment, featuring the visit of a bee in our classroom and the reactions of his classmates. In case you were wondering, during that event, all of the women in the room stayed calm, and the boys ran out screaming into the hallway until the all clear was given that the bee had left. Oddly enough, in Bill's version, it involves students being forced to blockade themselves into the classroom, burn their homework for heat, and sacrifice one of their classmates for food. There was Lucas, who was ridiculous most of the time, but he made me laugh way too much to stay angry with. John, who took a long time to trust me, but once he did, often asked if I had an extra apple in my lunch and would sometimes stay after school to let me help him with assignments. And I truly could go on forever, but there is one particular student who changed the way I look at the world, the way I frame my thinking, and it brings a smile to my face whenever I think of him. In fact, he at one point no longer became known as a student, but more of a phenomenon in our building. I first met Todd during lunch supervision in a grade 1 classroom. He was perched up on a shelf, and I said to him, "I'm pretty sure you shouldn't be there." And he responded with, "I'm a lunchbox." And I said, okay, but I really think you need to get down. And he said, I'm a lunchbox. So I did what any teacher would do, and as I left the room, I let his teacher know who was eating lunch in the hallway. There was a kid pretending to be a lunchbox in her room, and she should probably do something about that. I was blessed to have Todd join me the following year in my grade 2 class. Todd has unique learning needs, particularly because he has autism, and I loved his personality and the flair that he brought to our room. We shared many successes and many frustrations together that year. I recall one time I was at my desk and Todd brought up some work that he had completed, and he tugged at my pant leg trying to lift it up. And he said, Ms. Kraig, are you wearing shoes? And I said, yes. And he said, good, because I'm gonna knock your socks off. He loved math and finding possible math problems in books we read and movies we watched. He educated me about his favorite video games, and I did my best to remember details about it later. The only thing that Todd loved more than the games he played would be Nutella. He added often in his sandwiches for lunch and admitted more than once that he preferred to just have it straight out of the jar, but his mom made him put it on bread. He was fond of our class mascot, a stuffed frog whose name was Flames, and locating it each morning to write a sentence was the fuel I needed to get Todd interested in writing. His sentences grew from simple statements to short stories that bled from the front cover of the little slip of paper and onto the back, explaining how Flames got to the current location in his room. At the end of grade 2, I was sent back to teach junior high, so Todd now had to come see me and Flames in a different hallway and classroom on his movement breaks. We continued to celebrate his great work, and he often took a running start, leaping into my arms to give me a hug. My grade 9 students were quick to point out that those hugs would be really awkward once Todd got to junior high. Upon my return, after a sabbatical that I took, I was able to teach my grade 2 class again, now in grade 5. It had taken me a decade of teaching, and I finally was in the same grade in which I met Mrs. Mitchell. I couldn't help but share the hatchet as a read aloud, because she had shared it with us many years ago. Todd continued to be an amazing writer, and he used words from videos from his worlds from his video games to inspire his storylines. I shared another read aloud with him, a book called Zorgamazoo, which if you haven't read, you must. It's an entire novel written in Dr. Seuss style rhyme. And Todd took the sophisticated vocabulary our class collected and incorporated it into his own work, and I was amazed. Eventually, it was time to move on from Crystal Park, and Todd was less than impressed when I told him about it. In the fall of my first year away, I bumped into him in the hallway, and as always, he greeted me with a hug. Just a normal one, not the running and jumping kind. And after talking for a little while, he said to me, "Wait a minute. Are you back, or are you visiting?" And I said, "I'm just visiting." And he said, "Oh." And I knew I was still not forgiven for leaving. The funny thing about connecting with students is that you never really forget about them, even when you might be far away. 2 summers ago, I traveled to Bali, and I wandered around a town called Sanur, and I came across a Dairy Queen. And wouldn't you know it, their feature blizzard that month was Nutella. So I snapped a photo, and I sent it to his mom via Facebook and asked her to share it with Todd. If anyone was going to be excited about a Nutella blizzard, it had to be him. Todd has since moved to Edmonton, but I do hope that he has taken with him the notion that he can do amazing things with his great ideas. I hope he considers me one of his balcony people. I came across a quote when I was in university by Krista McAuliffe that says, "I touch the future. I teach." I love this quote because it is the essence of what I do and of what we do. But it wasn't until I started thinking about this talk that I began to grasp the scope and the power of those words. Because I am quite sure that when Mrs. Mitchell set up her classroom at Edgewater Elementary many years ago, she had no idea that her work would inspire me to do what I do each day. To build relationships, to make connections, and to truly care and be a good person for the students I work with. Her relationship with me is somehow connected to every relationship I have developed with the students I've worked with during the past 16 years. What a powerful role we have. After all, we touch the future, we teach. Thanks.